Have you met the love of your life before 30? Moved out of your parents' house by 23? People are asking you these really big existential questions and expecting you to have the answers.
Jemma Sbeg is someone everyone in their 20s needs. Her podcast was one of the 20 most listened to podcasts in the world last year. Why are our 20s such a confusing and stressful decade?
It's like the $1 million question. To explain why our 20s are so confusing, we do have to start in like the teenage years. The science tells us that
I want to talk about the paradox of choice.
we are this generation that can see how many lives there are out there for us to live. We think that that is a good thing. It is not. If you're not familiar with the study that created this, the reason the paradox of choice gets us and really restricts us is
Should we be having a 5-year plan in our 20s? What do you think people struggle with most when it comes to relationships in their 20s?
It's a really interesting question. Can I say one other thing? If you really want to change your life in your 20s, go on dates with people who...
Jemma Sbeg is someone everyone in their 20s needs. Her podcast, The Psychology of Your 20s, was one of the 20 most listened to podcasts in the world last year, and she started it as a hobby while working her 80-plus hour week in a corporate job. I will be totally clear with you. My aim going into this episode was just to get as much advice from Jemma as physically possible to make it a guide to owning and understanding what is arguably the most confusing decade of our lives. We covered everything from finding your dream job, to comparison, to moving to a new city, to relationships, and so much more. And one of my favourite things about Jemma is that she comes to everything with evidence. She comes with statistics and really helps our understanding of it overall. And to me, that makes a huge difference to actually just being able to live my life, understand why I'm feeling certain ways. And honestly, we will be doing another episode of this because I feel like we didn't even scratch the surface, even though there is so much here. As always, it makes a huge difference to the podcast if you could just click the like button, you know? It just doesn't really take you that long. And also, if you would like to see more interesting conversations with interesting people, if you could hit subscribe, then you can see them all, because that is absolutely what we love doing over here. But either way, thank you and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be in the UK.
The big UK.
The big
in this
K.
room. The biggest part in the UK. My office. No, but I mean, not just me. My team are obsessed with you and everything you do.
Oh my goodness. I really needed to hear that. My imposter syndrome's been going off the charts today.
Really?
Yeah, I was saying to you, Andy, whenever I come to a new country, especially, which is what you were saying, I just feel so out of depth. Because I'm like, oh my God, nobody knows me here. What am I doing here? Maybe this opportunity is better for somebody else. So it's really nice that you said that.
No, get
It's
that
very
out your
kind.
head.
I know, I need to. I give people advice about that.
Yeah.
And then here I am being like...
Isn't it so funny though that that's the way it even when we know factually and instinctively that it's not the right way for our brains to feel, and we're still I'm a piece of shit.
Literally, it's self-sabotage. And it's so interesting because your friend could come to you with that same conundrum and you're like, gosh,
Yeah.
you have no idea what you're talking about. Here is 5 refined points about why you're wrong. But then when your brain says it's you are so right.
You're so right.
You are the smartest person for thinking that about yourself. Good job.
So I ask everyone whether they feel like they are currently more working hard or hardly working.
Oh, working hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I just finished a book. So,
Wow.
And I got it in my head. You'll come to realize that my relationship with productivity is incredibly toxic. And I got it in my head. Yeah, I know. Yeah. And I got it in my head that I was going to finish the book in 4 months. Because I was I just want to get it done. I don't want any gaps because I want it to be, I want it to be cohesive, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, that was a terrible decision because my deadline wasn't for another 3. So I was just working really hard on it.
We're the same person because I did the exact same. I gave myself half the time to write it and half the time to edit it.
Yeah.
And then I was on a strict, by the 10,000 word schedule. I was no, I have to have 10,000 done by then, 10,000 done by then, 10,000 done by then.
Yeah. It's honestly, it was, but once you have this thing where once you set your mind to something, you can't break it. It is such a deep promise. And I always, and I'm sure it's component of OCD where I'm okay, something bad's going to happen if I don't, I'm going to be so behind. Something's going to fall from the sky. Like, if I've made this promise, like, I need to keep it. It's just like a whole thing. So working hard, I've just finished that, and just so much, always so much. Once you like get in the fast, like once you get in that lane of like productivity and output, it's so hard to get out of it.
Oh, no, 100%. And I also feel like I think a lot about the fact that the reason my relationship with productivity is so toxic is because I've always been so highly rewarded by it. Like, when I tell myself the world is going to fall apart when I don't reach a deadline, I then reach a deadline and I get rewarded for it, and I did the work and I get paid for it, or like whatever it might be. And I'm like, okay, so and I was correct.
The world didn't fall apart. That's your reward. I know, it's the reinforcement. And I think it's like you get addicted to the sense of purpose, and you get addicted to the sense of, again, reinforcement. If I put in more, normally you get out more as well. But it does hit a level where you actually physically can't keep doing that.
Sure.
I think I'm about like five minutes away from that. Like,
perfect. Well, I'll check back in.
Yeah, please do.
4:04.
I won't be here. I'll actually be on the floor. So
perfect. Well, I'll just come down there.
We do it under the table. Be so fun.
So last year, your podcast was the 19th most listened to in the world.
I know. It's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy.
That is, first of all, that is fucking nuts just as a stat, but I can also completely see why. Like, it makes so much sense, and you rinse that imposter syndrome out of your head before I can knock it out of you.
I think it's really interesting because I know the numbers, right? I could tell you my listenership, I could tell you my downloads, and the 19th number, I feel so weird talking about it, but like, yeah, it's such a sign of success, but you feel so detached from that because you don't, especially like I work by myself quite a bit because all my team is in the US and in the UK. So I spend a lot of time by myself and a lot of time not really, I think, fully feeling the impact of the work that I do. And that sometimes makes me feel like, was that number, is that a lie? Like, is that real? But it is like an incredible experience, and I've built such a beautiful community.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It's entirely reflective of the work you do, because there honestly would be, I can completely see why you would have such like a supportive and incredible community, because like you've bonded this many people over this time in our lives that just feels so confusing.
Yeah.
And we'll come on to speak about why and like what that really means and like why that's such a bonding point. But I do feel like the vulnerability and the like, both the vulnerability but also like the factual side of it that you brought to it, I feel like is a real anchoring kind of hopeful resource for so many people.
Well, I think that the thing that I also noticed when I first began about the wellness community is, yes, it is so valid that more people are talking about this, and it's amazing that it's more accessible, but there does come a point where like the advice does actually need to be evidence-based. And I think when you have a platform that is speaking to millions of people, it's unethical to go on and be like, well, this is what I think and therefore you should believe it too. So that's like a big component of the psychology of your 20s is, if you listen to the show, there will be articles, there will be journals, there will be statistics. It is going to be like factual theory, rather than me being like, okay, just like stare into the sun for 5 minutes a day to like realign your chakras. Like, please don't do that. Please don't do that. The Fred Hollows Foundation right now is like stop.
Please protect your eyes.
Yeah, wear sunglasses. Exactly. But yeah, like you can see there's stuff that people say that is just as harmful as imagine me saying that. Like, and so I think the thing that the wellness community needs to do better in a sense is like actually giving people scientific evidence and advice rather than just opinionated theories in a way.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that stands out to me about that is like, well, your podcast wouldn't be the 19th most listened to in the world if we didn't all bond over this thing. And if we do all bond over this thing, then there must be relative experiences and data that applies to all of us that can actually help us through it.
Exactly. Like you've just hit the nail on the head. Like there is an explanation. And when there's not an explanation, that's even more revealing because I think it really shows that the science is not catching up with the experience. So like I always give the example of situationships, right? That's a new term. That's kind of a new concept. I had to explain to my mum what that was about. There is very few like academic articles about that. And yet I would say that if you sat down most people who are in their late teens, 20s, maybe early 30s, and said, have somebody that you know of yourself been in a situation, do you know what I'm talking about? They'd be like, yeah, it's despicable, it's awful, I never want to do that again. Like, it ruined my friend's life. And there's no science behind it, so you have to find other theories that explain it. And so I think it's so important that in these experiences where we feel very lonely and very alone, especially in our 20s when everything is so fucking confusing, there is actually a reason behind that you can. And you know what, I will say this, some people like a reason and some people like comfort. And I think that I try and combine both of those things, because some people find a lot of solace in the facts of the experience, and some people just find solace in the fact that it is not a singular isolated experience,
right?
And that they just want to hear that they're not alone. And I think that the research kind of provides both those things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And obviously, I mean, you've studied our 20s for a long time now. You've gone very in depth. You've done hundreds of podcasts on it. Why are our 20s such a confusing and stressful decade?
It's like the $1 million question, right? I'm gonna give you 3 points. I'm gonna break it down.
Point, evidence, explanation.
Yeah, 1.1, 1.2 section. Yeah, I'm gonna give it to you like a paper. No, just kidding. I think the first biggest reason is there is no playbook. There is absolutely no guidebook. There has been millions of people that have done this kind of pilgrimage before us, but each of those paths is totally unique. So for a lot of our for every year, I think every age up until 18, there is a structure around what comes next. And the structure normally revolves around education or revolves around the schooling system. So, you know, you graduate from, I don't know what it's called here, primary school. Yeah, school. And then you go to secondary school, you go to high school, and there are these very easy steps to the big goal of graduating. And nothing really starts before you get to graduation, and nothing prepares you for afterwards, because it is like this big wall that once you climb over, it's like this empty field and there is no path. And I think that to explain why our 20s are so confusing, we do have to start in like the teenage years and how structured it typically is. And the second component as to why they're so confusing is because once we reach that point, every single one of our paths splinters. You have one friend who is like off solo traveling. Someone's married with kids. Someone's doing their masters. Someone's still working, you know, the job they had at 15. Someone's starting their own business. And there is no specific blueprint for what needs to be done. But the third point is that at the same time that there is no way to do it, there is an expectation of this like to-do list, that there are some things that you need to tick off to be an accomplished person, to be on the right track. And that is very traditional, right? It's like, have you met the love of your life before 30? Well, you better have. Otherwise, what are you doing? You know, are you moved out of your parents' house by 23? That's really, really important. Like, what about your friends? Do you have a big group of friends? Do you know what you want to do with your life? And so it's like, suddenly you're like in this decade where you genuinely don't know who you are yet. Everyone throws around that statistic of like, your brain is not fully formed until 25. Yes, but then your personality isn't fully formed until much later. Like, there's so much growth that happens, and yet people are asking you these really big existential questions and expecting you to have the answers. There's my synopsis for you.
That was so good.
Okay, I'm so glad.
That was so beautifully concise.
My 3-point attack plan.
No, and I could see where the bullet points were, and that really makes me happy. But I think as part of that, like, you know, I totally agree with all of that. And I think that we have to talk about like the magnifying factor of like, prior to the past 20 years, we would see that reflected among our friend groups and our peers. Like, we would see, okay, well, this friend's doing a master's, as you say, this friend's starting a family, this friend's still doing the job they were doing when they're 15, this like person's doing going backpacking or whatever it might be. And then, whereas like now you see that not just among your friends, you see that reflected literally over the whole world. Like, I could look up millions of, I don't know, 27-year-olds right now and be like, what are they doing? How much money do they have? Like, have they met their partner? Do they have kids? Like, do they have a career? Like, have they been promoted 3 times? Like, all of these different things. You have an unlimited pocket of access to everything that's going to make you feel inferior or like you've not done it right. Like, imagine if you had 5 friends and you were like, well, I want that one's love life, I want that one's career, I want that one's like sense of fun, I want that one's like family, like all of these different things. You would be able to somewhat say like, okay, but they don't have that, the other one's career, they don't have the other one's this. Whereas like, because of the way we absorb social media now, there's really no way to see the holes in what they don't have. All you see is what they do have.
Absolutely. And it is like the age-old battle of comparison. And it's really interesting because something I've noticed is that in the age of social media, right, the only kind of comparison we're doing is upward social comparison. And that means that the only people that we compare ourselves to are those that we assume are doing better than us. And I was thinking about this the other day because someone came up to me and was like, oh my God, I want this life that it seems that you have. And I was thinking about it. I was like, the times that I've been most miserable have been when I have been most active on social media, because it's like, I feel like I'm compensating for how shit I feel. And so, yeah, you're completely right. That's another component. It's just such an unrealistic, and I know it's like, everyone says this, but it really is.
No, 100%. And that just made me think, because the other day I did a podcast and I went on it, and she was like, at the end, she was like, oh, and like, we were just talking, she was like, and how did you do this? Because like, I really want your life. And I was like, really? And I was like, in my head, I was so having a shit time that I was like, really? Like, why would, like, isn't it clear that this is like a shit show at the moment? And then I was like, wait, no, it's not clear. It's not clear at all.
No.
And actually that's so reflective of the fact that, like, I always think that about other people's businesses. Like, everyone's business is a shit show from the inside, but all you see is your shit show and you see everyone else's like polished castle.
Yes.
And I think it is so interesting, and when you start to see it about yourself, you start to realize like how much it cannot be true for other people. Because I like had this like underlying assumption that people would be like, oh yeah, she do be having a tough time right now. And I was like,
it's crazy.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, no, but that would actually, you would never get that from my social media.
I wouldn't get that.
Well,
it's honestly like, I wouldn't have gotten that. You know, I literally walked in here and I was like, my sister is such a huge fan, and like she loves your brand, like she loves Tyler, and like, and it's so interesting because I think there are probably people listening to this who have, I would hope, have such a deep admiration for you, and probably hearing you just be like, yeah, it's a bit of a shit show is like kind of nice. I'm sure. Like, I remember someone saying that to me, like, this really huge podcaster was like, oh, like, I always look at my listens or whatever. And I was like, oh, me too. Like, it's not just me. Like, there is this sense of like, when you humanize yourself in a way that social media doesn't let you do, there's just so much more compassion and so much more, like, I think, empathy and just a sense of normalcy.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's okay. It's all right. Slow down. Like, you've got it. You're sorting it out.
No, absolutely. And kind of along those lines and what we've discussed in terms of like those 5 friends, for example, I want to talk about the kind of paradox of choice when it comes to your life decisions in your 20s. Like, I've seen so many TikToks being like, I want to be the girl that's just like moved country and just starting again, but I also want to be the girl that's like found the love of her life and is like kind of settling down, and I also want to be the girl who's like gone to New York and has started this big hotshot career, and like I just know I'm all of these girls at once. Like, how do we overcome that level of kind of, I guess, anxiety to an extent of like making the right decision and choosing that like sliding doors right life path in our 20s?
Oh, I love that, sliding doors. That's a really great way to put it, right? I do feel that like one of the curses of getting older is that, yeah, you feel more free in a sense. You feel more independent. You're probably making more money. Like, you probably feel a bit more like sure of yourself. But with every choice you make, it does feel like a door closes and that your life becomes more restricted. That is the paradox of choice. And if you're not familiar with like the study that created this, basically these researchers went to a farmer's market and they were selling jam, and what they wanted to see was, were people more likely to be happy or make a choice when it came to buying jam when there were 6 jams versus 24? And they assumed that when there was 24 jams, people would be more likely to buy one and would be happier because they had more options. But actually, fewer people bought the jam. And a lot of people were like, I really wish that I'd bought in the marmalade. And actually, I bought the lemon curd, but I should have bought the strawberry. Like, dang. Whereas when people only had 6 options, they were like, no, I'm really happy with my choice. So it's this weird thing where we are this generation that is very lucky and very privileged, and we can see how many lives there are out there for us to live. And we think that that is a good thing. It is not, because it just makes you so much more aware of the possibility and therefore feel like you just can't live all those lives at once. And my advice would be, you can do it all, just not at once. You can do it all. See your life as not just this big chunk of time, but as these seasons, right? And your 20s involves, I always say, 5 seasons. You've got like 21 to 20 to 22, 22 to 24, blah, blah, blah. You can figure out those numbers. Yeah, and I realize that might be a bit repetitive. But you have like all this time. And instead of just being like, oh my God, my 20s, think like, okay, but this is season 1. And okay, in 6 months, we're going to be in season 2. What am I going to change? Only one thing. I just need to change one thing about my life in season 2. Maybe that is, I'm going to start dating again. Maybe that is, okay, I'm going to just start my side hustle. Everything else in my life can stay the same. I think we often think that we need to make these big choices. Like every example you gave, right, was like huge. Like I want to be the girl who lives in a new country. I want to be the big business lady. I almost said bitch, which is awful.
Big girl boss.
Big girl boss.
CEO.
Yeah, the CEO. Gosh, that is the worst. But you're totally right. I want to be the CEO in New York City. Like I want to meet the love of my life. Those are big things. Just focus on changing one small thing every season, every chapter, and see how that transforms. Because I think the reason the paradox of choice gets us and really restricts us is because we think that it needs to be magnificent and enormous when it can actually be a bit more micro.
No, that's so true. And I think that what often happens is we get to a point where we realize that we're maybe not happy with where we are, and we suddenly just throw everything like out or start 20 new things or whatever it might be, and then inevitably we fall off and we go back to square one because it was just we were biting off more than we could chew.
Exactly.
And it's the same with like everything. It's the same with starting a business. It's the same with changing your career. It's the same with whatever it might be. Like, as you say, you can have it all, but you can't have it all at once. And like this idea that you need to overhaul your whole life is like, I think this sometimes around like some glow up content on social media, and like I think some of it is really great because some of it is really around just like the 1% every day, build good habits, like just this, like great, fantastic, science-based, like really going to help you build evidence that you can do things and go in the right direction. But like so much of it is like how I become an entirely new person in like a month. And it's like, okay, but you're not an entirely new person in a month, because even if you stuck to those things for a month, the chance of you sticking to all 20 of those changes over 6 months even is close to nil.
Have you ever done 75 hard?
No. Nor do I have the attention.
So I have beef with 75 hard for that very reason. And I honestly, I'm like, I feel like I don't even need to say this, but I have full respect for people who do it, because if it works for you, and they're so disciplined and incredible. But for me, like on a more personal and scientific level, I feel like that is an example of that, where it just doesn't work, because it's only like, if you really want to change your life in your 20s, yes, there will come points of crossroad, but there, the kind of philosophy behind 75 hard is like, just like this you can change everything in this short period of time, and you want the instant gratification, and like, okay, you want to lose weight, you want to get fit, you want to like improve everything, like, yeah, you can do that in like 3 months. And I just think that everything in our 20s really does come down to the sense of like, I need to be doing it all right now, and I need to be seeing results right now. And it's like, no, this is a process. Like the quote that I love is like, you don't harvest the day that you plant the seed. And I just think that is such like simple but profound advice for people during this decade, to be like, you can make small changes that if you're consistent will build the life that you want.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And we all know that that's like, I mean, it's like the James Clear Atomic Habits stuff. Like it's very, it is based on habits theory, which is based on how we actually change our lives through small things which have big results, which is like fantastic. It's so funny that you say 75 hard, because actually when like Shreddy, the company I started, that's like a fitness app based company, we would get so many requests being like, will you do a 75 hard? Will you do a 75 hard? Will you do a 75 hard? And we ended up doing like a Shreddy 70, where we were very specifically, we were like, your things for the day are just like, they're small. Like they're not about like, you've got to do 2 workouts and you've got to do this and this and this. Specifically because it's like, if you look at habits theory, building in 2 45-minute workouts to your day is not a habit. Like it technically cannot be classified as a habit.
Who has time for that?
Because it physically is not integratable in terms of, I don't even know if that was a word that I just said.
No, that was so eloquent. I listened to you say that and I was like, yeah.
I was like, baby,
it's not integratable.
It is not integratable.
No, it's not.
Integratable is a word.
Also, like, sorry, I'm going to continue my beef with this, but like, how many liters of water do they say you need to drink?
Oh, I don't know, but I actually have a hilarious story around litres of water, because I drink so much water, right?
Yeah.
I actually think, like, I remember I once spent a weekend with my mum and she was like, I'm worried that you're going to drown yourself, because I drink like 5 litres of water a day.
Are you kidding?
I know, and I don't think I'm meant to.
No.
But I think I have a real, I don't know.
It depends.
I have a compulsion towards
unquestionable.
It. But yeah, but we were making our health and fitness planners and we had little like droplets for and they the designers kept putting like glasses of water, and I kept changing it in the rounds. I kept changing it to liters of water, and then they kept changing it back to glasses of water, and they had to, in a meeting, they had to be like, by the way, Grace, the reason we keep changing that back to glasses of water, I was like, can everyone stop changing this to glasses? It's liters. And they were like, no, it's actively against like health
advice
for you to.
Have you gotten your kidneys checked recently? I think that needs to be done. Like, this isn't actually an intervention. Yeah.
I drink an obscene amount of water, and I think it's an activity thing.
Yeah.
I'm constantly like,
do you chew gum?
Doing things. No, because it makes my stomach funny. But if I could, I tell you now, I would chew the most gum out of everyone.
Yeah, so I chew so much gum. I literally had to, my New Year's resolution this year was to quit gum. And I did it. I've done it. I quit gum. See, I'm not chewing gum right now. But it was because I was so like anxious that I was always like, I need like the tactile sense of it.
I'm thinking of getting a little fiddle ring.
You should get one. Have you heard of, so a friend of mine, Ellie Middleton, who is from the UK, and she's an autism and ADHD advocate. She has like this fidget thing that she uses in interviews, and she was telling me about it, and she was like, it's so useful because you actually, I was like, is that going to be a distraction? Obviously she's neurodivergent, but like, yeah, she was like, it really helps you focus because all that nervous energy is going elsewhere. So maybe we should get matching ones.
That would be really nice. I'll arrange that.
Yeah.
I'll have that.
That can be your next product. Your next business. Do you have time?
Don't. I will do it. I will do it. And with what we were talking about in terms of like these seasons when it comes to your 20s, because I've heard of seasons often applied to life, and I love the idea, but I've heard of it in much bigger blocks. Like we think of it as like decade seasons rather than necessarily as in like your season of your 20s, your season. I love thinking of it as 2 years, and that kind of brings into question the idea for me around like, I get a lot of questions around like what should my 5-year plan be when I've like just got into a grad scheme or whatever it might be. What do you think about 5-year plans? Like, should we be having a 5-year plan in our 20s?
I don't believe in it, and I know some people will find that controversial. I think it is a great exercise in terms of value refinement and really thinking about what your ambitions are, but I actually think that it's better to do this exercise instead, which is think about a day in 5 years' time in your life, and I want you to think about it in as much detail. Where are you waking up? What are your bed sheets like? You know, what's your morning commute to work? What's your office? Where are you going to work that day? What emails are you replying to? What does your space look like? Who are you getting lunch with? Who are you going to have dinner with in the evening? What does your nighttime routine look like? If you had to do anything that evening, like what would make you happy in 5 years' time to be doing? Think about that instead of being like, I need to have $30,000 saved, like a crazy amount, and I need to have gotten this number of promotions. I want to be manager, and I want to be engaged. Maybe that one is one that you should think about, because, you know, that's an important like family planning thing. But in terms of like more career and finances and things like that, I think putting too much pressure on yourself to have it all figured out in this like block of time actually doesn't help you, because it makes you feel so much more restricted. And I think also it just feels like such a big task. It's such a huge thing that you want to do that sometimes it doesn't feel present. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
Can you really incorporate that into your daily life? Sometimes no.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting, because a lot of the time we talk about financial freedom because of what it leads to. Like, so we talk about the fact that I want that money because I want to be able to decide what I do with my time, or I want that money so that I stop feeling anxious about my bank account, or like whatever it might be. And I like the way you've laid that out, because essentially what you're doing is the result of the end goal, not just the end goal.
Exactly.
Like, rather than being like, I want to be manager because I want to be manager. You don't want to be manager because you want to be manager. You want to be manager because you are higher up the hierarchy, because you've kind of got more experience, because you're earning more, because you feel more fulfilled, like all of these things. You don't just want to be manager for the sake of it, and you don't just want £30,000 for the sake of it.
Exactly.
You only want those things in relation to what those things bring you. Yes. So I really like the idea of outlining, therefore, if I got that, what does that mean to me? And I think that, like, I think you can absolutely, I don't have, you know, an issue with, say, like vision boarding, as long as it considers that. Like, it's not just about getting that manager title. It's about what that means for the rest of your life in terms of, as you say, when are you waking up? How are you getting to work? Like, what's your kind of situation?
I think the other thing is, I'm sure, like, I think about my life 5 years ago. There was no way I would have thought that this is what it was going to be like. And if I'd followed my 5-year plan from 5 years ago, because I did have one, I would be like, I don't know, working for like a political party probably. And I would be like interning like at a government agency. Like, I wanted to be a politician.
I see that.
Yeah. Well, I thank you. But I'm also kind of like grimy.
I don't say it in a bad way.
Yeah. Thank you. Because I'm like,
I'd like you to be a politician rather than the politicians now.
I mean, I'd like you to be one as well.
Thank you.
My God. That's the next. No. Enough. And someone needs to tell you to stop. Like,
it's so true. It's so true. So I was in a thing actually in government the other day.
Were you actually?
And someone walked out the room and tapped me on the shoulder and she goes, "You should go into politics."
You should.
And the way that fulfilled every single one of like my childhood goals. I really thought I'd be in politics, you know.
My God, we are the same person.
We actually are the same person. It's come to my attention.
It's crazy. But then you realize, sorry, I'm going to get political, like how corrupt everything is. And you're just like, maybe I don't want to be part of that machine. Anyhow, this has turned into a completely different podcast. I'm sorry if this is a mess. But anyhow, if I had followed my 5-year plan, that's what it would have been like. And I just think that when you let yourself be a bit more like lucid and free and flexible, there is space for surprises and there is space for changes. And I often think about it in the case of like, okay, you're on the pipeline for the manager position and then somebody connects with you on LinkedIn and goes, you should really go for this job. No, but I need to be manager. That was part of my 5-year plan. That's what's going to make me happy. There's so much that you become closed off to, and you're not actually. The other thing is that I think a lot of the milestones that we think will make us happy actually don't. And I've definitely found that. Well, there were milestones that I hit where I was like, my first serious relationship was an example. I was like, I just want to be in a relationship. I just want to get it out of the way. I just want to be loved. No, because I didn't get it out. Yeah, like didn't have a boy. I never had a boyfriend when I was younger, and then I went to uni and I finally had my boyfriend, and I was like, I did it. Yeah, and it was like awful because it was like, no, those milestones that you think are important are not happy, and now I'm with somebody who I'm like, I let go of the pressure. And I'm like super happy now. So yeah, that's from my experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely true in that we can get quite like tunnel vision is good for the right things.
Yes.
But tunnel vision applied to a hypothetical that you don't actually know is going to be what you want in 5 years. Like it's what you now want for you in 5 years. You don't know if that's what you in 5 years wants for you.
Yes.
Sorry,
exactly.
that was like explaining like the most
Dr.
convoluted
Seuss,
way
I
that
love
it
it.
possibly could have been. But I think that when you get stubborn and tunnel visioned on something that you have no evidence that is actually the right thing, you are just hypothesizing.
Yeah.
I think that's when you start to like, what's the saying? Cut off your nose in spite of your face.
Exactly. That is exactly the saying. Me too. But you're right. I love what you said about when you have tunnel vision for a hypothetical. But I do want to say, like, it is important to be focused, right? And it is important to have broader goals. But I do think that the goals, there's this idea of having SMART goals. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's like, I don't even know, specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, timely. But what about like sustainable? And what about like healthy? And what about happy? And what about like product? Like there's so many other criteria for a goal rather than just its efficiency and getting there fast. So yes, have like in your 20s, I think it's valuable to have an idea of the life you want to live and to be working towards that, but don't think that there is one way to get there. That's probably my like concluding statement.
Yeah.
For what we were talking about.
No, I think that's really valuable. And I think that it's personally, I've always felt that it's about setting goals, but not being so tied to them that you don't see when they're no longer your goals. Like I think I had a few things that had always been my end goal and stayed that way for about 3 years. And then I like checked in with myself and I was like, that has not been my end goal for about 2 years. But I've just refused to admit that has changed, or my values have changed, or the type of life I want to build has changed, or I've just gathered information that shows that that's not what I want to do.
Yeah, I really like that you said that. You know, that it's really interesting because I also think that we feel a lot of obligation to be the person that we promised we would be a couple years ago. I see this a lot with people in uni who are doing courses that they really don't want to do. University is so expensive. College is so expensive. If you really hate it, but you just feel this need to be that person and that's part of your goal, like I do think that comes at the detriment. That's like an example I always think of. And it's like what you said, like that hasn't been your goal for a while. So why are you still pursuing it as if it is and like making yourself miserable? Obviously that's a very privileged like standpoint to just be like, just quit. But it is like very expensive to be doing that if you don't love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with sunk cost fallacy with anything.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I think that the amount of people that are like, oh, well, I studied law and so I actually kind of hate being a lawyer, but like I've already studied it. And it's like, okay, so you've done 4, 5, 6 years here. You do know that hopefully you're going to be around for the next 60.
Yeah.
And working for the next 40. Like when you really start to say you push another year and you push another year and you push another year, you're only 3 years down the line.
Like, exactly. Quit now. Like,
get ahead, quit everything.
Yeah, get ahead by going back. But no, but it's so, I love that you said that because it is this sense of like, the time will pass anyway. And it's like, yes, you might be scared now, but in 3 years' time, you might be looking back to this version of you right now being like, I wish that he or she or they had just like made that decision for me.
Yeah.
Same with relationships, I will say, to segue. Like, if I always say this to people, like, if you're thinking like, I really want to break up with this person, let me just wait it out. Let me see if things change. I just don't want to be single. It's like, that breakup's coming, girl.
Like, so I speak a lot about this. Like, I mean, we as women obviously have we have a fixation on the idea of like getting to 30 and being single if we want to, you know, plan a family or if we want to, whatever it might be. Obviously there's an element of that like biologically fine, but like the amount of people I've heard be like, I don't want to break up with this person because I do not want to be single and 30. And it's like, okay, so say you're 27 now. And then you push through another year, you're 28. You push through another year, you're 29. You push through another year, you're 30. You push through another year, you're only 31. Like, as in, like, do you think you can do you want to push through every year for the rest of your life? Push through 10 of those years, you are only 37.
Yeah.
Like, it is a fallacy. Like, it is a complete fallacy that this like arbitrary goal or thing that you absolutely do not want to do has any relevance in like your overall happiness.
Yeah.
And actually the fact that ripping off the, I was about to say plaster, very inappropriate for an international audience, ripping off the band-aid can, and technically stepping backwards, quote unquote, can be the most beneficial thing in actually moving you forwards and closer to the life you want to build.
You are absolutely right. And I really like the way that you just explained those years of like 27 to 37, like just articulating that you think about it differently. And I used to say this when I was single, like I would much rather be like single at 35 and find the love of my life than be like 50 and starting all over again, because I, you know, stayed with the person that I didn't, because I didn't want to be single. And it's like you're staying with somebody out of fear of something. Like that is from a place of fear. You might not be fearing them, but you are fearing something. And I don't think that love doesn't really grow in those circumstances, right? That's like a tale as old as time. And I think when we think about it differently and you realize that when you are, it's also kind of a disservice to them as well, I will say. Like, I think there will be a residual unhappiness on both ends that's going to happen. And you don't have to think about them, like think about you and think about the fact that if you left and you never know what could be around the corner. Like 3 months later, you could meet the love of your life. Or maybe 5 years later, you could meet your best friend that you wouldn't have met if you'd stayed in that relationship, even if you're still single. Like there is so much time to figure it out and so much time to meet people. Like no one goes through life not meeting like at least somebody, even if it's a platonic soulmate, that will make them feel seen. And like I said, I just feel like when you stay because you're scared of being single at 30, you're still staying out of fear, even if it doesn't feel like what you think it does.
And related to this, I'd love to talk about what you think people struggle with most when it comes to relationships in their 20s.
So obviously I get so many questions about this, so many. The biggest one I think is heartbreak and thinking that you're never going to find anyone better. And that also really relates as to when to leave. When is this relationship done, and how do I find the courage to kind of like walk away, because it is courageous. And also when it comes to relationships is the sense of like not meeting the timeline. And it happens in two senses. It happens for people, I think especially people who have never been in a relationship, and they feel like they're missing out. They feel like everyone else is having these like beautiful, wonderful experiences and they're not. And then there's people who have been in a long-term relationship and they've broken up at 30, or they've broken up at 28, or they've broken up at 32 and they're like, I'm starting over again and I didn't want to be doing this. So, but I will say like everyone has their own unique thing that they're really struggling with when it comes to this. Like, you know, you can have like the happiest relationship and still be thinking about fertility and still be thinking about finances and still have doubts. Like there is this element of like relationship OCD as well that I think happens with a lot of us, where we're like, okay, is this relationship perfect? Is this who I want to be with? And I think that is normal to think that. But I don't think it's normal to be like, I'm just staying because I don't want to walk away.
Right. Definitely. Like there is this, it's definitely not right to assume that when you're in a relationship, everything's going to be amazing all the time in every single area. That's just like completely unrealistic. It's not in your life. It's not in relationships. It's not in friendships. But also at the same time, knowing which of those things do have to be enough good for you to stay.
Yeah, literally. And that's the thing I always like to say this to people is like, you're allowed to have doubts in a relationship. Like, especially early on, like you're allowed to have a few anxieties that this person might not be the one. Like that, I actually think that's normal. I actually think it's really normal to be like, and I'm sure there are people listening to this being like, what is this girl talking about? Like, no way. But if you don't really reflect and think about whether this person is right for you, are you just like daydreaming through your relationship?
Or are you just in the honeymoon period? Like,
yeah. Also really valid. Yeah. See, I think I just exited my, like, I'm still in my honeymoon period, but I definitely exited like my all in, like my big doe-eye honeymoon period. And yeah, I'm gonna be honest, like I did have a moment being like, okay, like let's really sit back and just think, is this person who I want in my life? It literally took me a minute for me to be like, yeah, of course.
Yeah, but that's so true. And I think that an important like thermostat to have like in a relationship is like, if I can't see any negatives in this person, I'm probably not thinking right. Like, as in, like, I'm probably not thinking right. That might be because it's the honeymoon period. That might be because they're really manipulative. That might be because I have low self-esteem and I put other people on pedestals. Like, if you cannot see any negatives in someone, like, genuinely you can't see any negatives, that's probably a wider issue. And I think that like not making decisions in honeymoon period, all of that, like so important.
Oh my God, yeah. The amount of friends who I love dearly, who I've seen move in with their partners after 6 months of dating. Don't do that. Don't do that. You're not going to be the same person as you are at 2.5 years in. When you actually like can see flaws. And when I feel like I'm going to speak for you here, and if I'm completely wrong, please tell me to shut up. But like when you're saying if you can't see anything wrong in your partner, we're not saying like, oh yeah, he is narcissistic, and that's a good thing. Like I can find something wrong with him
because I've been looking for a narcissist
this whole time. Like he can't read. Like I don't know. Like like there are certain things where it's like, no, wait. But like, oh my God, I really hate that he doesn't do his dishes. There's one, or like, oh okay, just those small things. Like you should. I do think it's kind of healthy to like,
oh my God, 100%,
not be all the time like completely like smitten in love. Can do no wrong with your partner.
Yeah, and I also think it's a good pointer to attachment style, because if you genuinely can't see any wrongs in that partner, likelihood is
you have an anxious attachment style.
You have an anxious attachment style, and you are being appropriately fed according to it in terms of like, which is great in some ways, but actually likelihood is that you haven't quite stabilized into a secure attachment style, which everyone should, in my opinion, aspire to in any relationship. And like there's a lot of data on the fact that you can become secure attachment in the right circumstance, but you have to like actively work towards that. But I do really think that like understanding your attachment style and understanding where you are on that anxious to avoidant spectrum is so important, especially when working out your future. Because if you are making decisions, you might be way past the honeymoon phase, but if you are making decisions still in an anxious attached kind of state, then you may well be making decisions purely, as you say, out of fear of therefore not having someone or whatever it might be.
And that's exactly right. And you said this amazing thing, which is that you can actually change your attachment style. Also, the science tells us that most of us are actually securely attached, but we do have moments of insecure attachment. And that's something I like to point a distinction between is, yes, you have a general attachment style, but if you've just come out of a terrible relationship or situationship that has left you looking left and right, unsure of what's happening, unsure of whether this person is actually cares about you and wants you, it is very normal for you to go through a period of anxiety or a period of ambivalence. But I think getting back to that stability and that security is something that everybody needs to do in their 20s. And if you haven't actually thought about it and you haven't actually sat with yourself and thought, what are the patterns that I continually see in my relationships that are actually causing me harm? Are there actually things that I'm doing that I'm repeating? Am I having the same fights? Am I, every relationship ending at 3 months? Is there something that I could be doing better for my happiness and for finding somebody that's right for me? Like everyone should do that at least once, even if it's a bit hard to look in the mirror.
Yeah, so how do you do that? Like if you find, because I feel like people tend to do that if they're the type of person who does do that. And if you're probably listening to this and being like, oh, I actually haven't done that, then it's probably not a natural inclination for you.
Yeah.
So like, how do you start to look at those things? For example, every relationship ends after 3 months. How do you start to look at those things and, I don't want to say fix them, but like become self-aware on them?
I think, but firstly, it's like take a trip down memory lane, have a bit of a history lesson with yourself. Is there a pattern? Is there a preference, and is there a pattern for certain types of people and certain types of behavioral dynamics? For example, you know, do you always find yourself with people who really love bomb you at the beginning and then really draw back? Or do you always find that it gets to like 6 months and then suddenly you're like, oh my God, this is too much, I need to get out of here? Or that you get really nitpicky and you're having all these like really stupid arguments? Actually be honest with yourself and look at those 3 things. Like, how did the relationship begin? How did the relationship end? What were the major problems? And if you're still with that person, what are the major problems? And is that can I draw a link either between the past and or like the past of you and that person's relationship, or my past relationships? And then I think really get into the depths of like, why do I think this happens? Is this a defense mechanism? Am I trying to protect myself from something? Is it like an insecurity that's like keeps manifesting in the exact same way? And I do think that you can have a bit of honesty with yourself without blame, right? Like, you can acknowledge that there are things that you might not be doing right and still love yourself.
Yeah. Like 100%. And we give that grace to other people. We don't necessarily give it to ourselves. Like, it's really easy to see a friend and be like, oh yeah, they're just a little bit like that. Like, they do have a tendency to do that or whatever. Yeah. But like, they're such a good person. They're such a good person. And we also at the same time really struggle to be self-aware sometimes, because self-awareness leads to blame rather than just like acknowledgement. Like, if you're finding out something about yourself and it's making you like bang your head against the wall because you're like, I'm so stupid and I need to fix this, like, that's not productive. Like, that's not helpful. And then that often leads to you finding out less about yourself because you want to hide from those things. But like, understanding that your specific flaws or tendencies aren't like flaw of you as a human. Like, they don't make you a worse person. They don't make you unentitled to self-love. And therefore being able to act on them, I feel like, is one of the most like valuable things we can build for ourselves. Yeah. And also it just adds texture and color. Also, some of my favorite kinds of people are the people who are like, yeah, this is something that I'm working on. Yeah. Who can be like, yeah, I'm sorry, like I know I'm being a little bit flaky, but I'm working on that. I love that. And I'm like, yes. And also, I think we should really, like, I try and normalize sharing things like that because I think it takes away from me being meaner to myself. Yes. Like, you know, when you're having like a bad day and it's because you're like jealous or because you're like there's something about it and you just happen to be like, oh, yeah, like and then I try and before I've even like said anything or before I've even been snappy, I've been like, I'm in a bad mood today because I'm jealous of this or like whatever. Yes. And like, I feel like it's not necessarily about taking the stigma away from it, but it's about like adding the layer of self-awareness and like removing me kind of feeling bad about the fact that I'm someone with flaws. And I feel like it helps you get closer. As you say, like, you love people who say, actually, I'm working on this. I feel like the more of us who could say, actually, I'm working on this. Like, imagine if everyone just said that about their things that weren't so good. Yeah. Like, everyone would be so much nicer and happier and like aware of the fact that we all have flaws, and also aware of the fact that that person that's really fucking pissing you off is not that bad a person. Maybe they're just going through some shit. Yeah, I'll say one. I literally did this with a friend the other day, and I was like, yeah, I'm overcommitting at the moment. I'm really sorry. I'm working on that. And that's why I cancel plans. And she was like, oh, thank you for being honest with that. Or like to Tom, my partner, I was like, I don't know, I was feeling really disconnected from him. And I was like, listen, I'm really sorry. I'm just like, I'm like having trouble focusing because I'm distracted by my phone, and there's something that I really want to respond to, and I know, you know, I was like, I know I said no work after this time, I'm working on it. Yeah. And he was just like, okay, thank you. Like, it's this accountability that you have with yourself and with others, and it's okay to be like, I'm not the most perfect person. Yeah. And then other people feel safe to do that in front of you as well, and it's just like a beautiful sharing moment. How do we then date with intention without kind of dating with too much like need or obsession to tick off certain goals by certain times? Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I think that it's very easy to be like, see the rest of our life as something in which we can work towards a goal that we have and want to apply that to dating, but we can't
do that with other people, right? Like you might meet someone fantastic and be like, yeah, they're the one and my plan is to get engaged in 4 years. And they're like, actually, I never want to get married. I never want to have children. And I never want to, I can't be that for you. And it's really hard to apply your rules and your regulations to other people. So instead, what I would say in terms of walking the line between being intentional and also just being open is just have a clear idea of what you want, but that doesn't need to be completely and utterly like stringent. So have a clear idea of like 5 things. I always say 5 things that you really want in a partner, and then 5 things that would be like okay, like you would really like them, but they're not deal breakers if they don't have them. 5 things that you really don't want, and have a clear idea of those 3 categories. So the 5 things in your first category are things that you know that you would not be happy with this person if they were to be like that. It might be like that they're a certain religion and that you might not want to date somebody outside of your religion. I think that's totally understandable. It might be that they're not a vegetarian and you are somebody who, you don't want to be serving steak at your wedding. Like just values. They want kids. That's a big one. They want to get married and that we have like the same kind of career, like something is aligned. And I think and then of course, like your non-negotiables, like, oh, it would be really nice if they were really active, but actually that's not like a big thing. They could not be and I'd still love them, or I'd really like for them to be ambitious, but actually if they want to be like a house husband, that's so sexy. Like, yeah, go off. And then the 5 categories of the 5 final things of like, okay, they like can't have a gambling addiction. Like they can't have mummy issues. Like the things that you're like, no, this is not going to work. That makes it more clear where it's like you have sorry, I used to be a consultant. So this is like me getting
McKinsey style.
Yeah, I'm like, so I just think that if you have a framework.
I'm just going to do a little diagram for you right here.
PowerPoint presentation. 7 slides. That's all you need. But yeah, just have a framework instead of like rules for yourself. Like don't feel too much pressure to like, have somebody who is exactly like the perfect height, perfect eye color, perfect everything. Have a bit of fun with it. Can I say one other thing? I know I've been talking for a bit. Go on dates with people who you don't think are your type. Because, oh my gosh, it will surprise you. And you will find like, you might meet the most like wonderful people. Like my current partner, my partner, I'm ready to replace it. The love of my life.
Next week's one.
Yeah. Well, he's actually very different. No, like the love. Yes. I'm dating out of my comfort zone. No, like the love of my life. I almost didn't go on a date with him because I was like, he lived really far away. He lived like 2 hours away from me, which in Australia, like he lived outside of Sydney. He lived in Wollongong, which if you're Australian, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's kind of far. And I almost was like, no, that's not going to work. Because I want somebody who lives in Newtown. I want someone who lives in my suburb, in like my area. And I did it anyways. And I like suddenly was like, oh my God, this person is like literally the love of my life. Like we're so perfect together and compatible. And he challenges me in every way. So date the people that you don't typically think that you would date as well.
No, I think that's great advice. And I think that as well, like, in every other part of our lives, we're quite good at being like, oh, well, I've tried that 3 times and it didn't work, so I'm not going to do it again.
Yeah.
Whereas with dating, we're like, cool, I've tried that 3 times, didn't work. Here's another one.
My God, who's
like,
that over there? Like, yeah. I always compare it to like, imagine if every time you went into your driveway, you like smashed into the wall. Surely you would try to go through a different direction. Like, surely you would learn to adjust. Like, that's the same with dating, right?
It's so true.
Yeah.
And it's so weird that we have that approach to, like, that's one of the areas. I mean, I think I can answer why it is for myself, or like in my mind, like, it feels like so much of why we date and what we go for is based on past either trauma or like things that have gone wrong, and like we date therefore out, as you say, out of fear to like protect ourselves from like being alone, or from being with someone who's too present, or from being with someone who, like, we date out of, I don't know, we build relationships often to fill gaps that are based on things that have happened to us otherwise. So like, I don't know, there's so much data on how there's that really, really, really good TED Talk. I've watched it multiple times. I think it's so interesting. It's basically all about, I actually sent it to my fiance and I was like, by the way, don't look at the title. Don't look at the title. This is not me suggesting anything. But it's basically all about how you are attracted to people based on your childhood trauma or things that didn't go right or whatever it might be. So like if you had a really overbearing parent, you're likely to go for someone who's really like overbearing and like over communicative, or if you had parents that were really absent, you'll generally go for really avoidant people or whatever it might be, which I think is an interesting concept as a whole. And I do think some people are the opposite. They go for the complete opposite when it's not necessarily what they need. But the whole idea is based on the fact that we are attracted to the pain that we know. Like we feel like, so for example, I'm airing my dirty laundry here. My family's like not tight knit at all. And I'm like very, I don't know, spent a lot of time like on my ones growing up. And so I have always gone for like very avoidant people. Like I've always gone for very avoidant because I wouldn't know what to do if they were overbearing and too loving. Like I'm comfortable with someone being like, I love you, and then disappearing for a month, you know? And so that would be what I would go for, because I was like, obviously internally, not me actually saying this to my friends, but like internally, obviously I was like, well, that makes, like, that's fine. I can deal with that because I'm used to that. I've always had that. And so I remember watching that for the first time and finding that so interesting, because I was like, oh my God, that explains so much why I constantly go for those people, because I am aware what it feels like to have that avoidance, and therefore I know how to self-soothe in that situation. I don't know how to self-soothe in any other. So actually, whereas actually like a lot of the work obviously you need to do is to be able to bring you back to this neutral state so that you choose people based on who you want to be with, rather than basically aggravating your trauma.
Yeah, it's the devil that we know, right? That's what the whole thing comes back to, is as humans, you like described it so perfectly, we feel so much comfort with what is familiar, and it doesn't challenge us because we know the story, we know the narrative. They'll love us and leave us. Even if that's a terrible outcome, it still feels comfortable and it still feels consistent, and we know what is going to happen, which makes us feel safe, even if the opposite is actually occurring. So again, we circle back to like the person that you might be trained to love might not be the person that's right for you. And if you're the first example of love, even if it's a familial love, is your family, I always say to people, choose somebody that you want to love you the way that someone is going to love your child. And I know that sounds really, really strange, but if you think about it, it's like, okay, so yeah, maybe you do eventually want to have kids, maybe you don't, but if you do, and if you think about this version of you, this baby version of you, how would you want them to love you? How would you want somebody to love your offspring? Because maybe they will end up loving your offspring that way, and that actually undoes a lot of the generational trauma, right? Because you're going to be, if the theory goes that we learn how to love from our parents, your children are going to learn how to love from you. So why not choose somebody that's going to help them on a good path? And it also just, like, I think refocuses you on what you actually deserved rather than what you received.
Yeah, that's so funny, because that was actually the real moment where I realized that I was just like going for the wrong people over and over, because I was like, oh, I'm going to create the childhood that
you had,
right, which like sob story, fine, blah, 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 blah. But like as in like emotions, I'm really good at them.
Moving on.
I
love you're like, you know what we're doing, sorry, can I just quickly say this, there's this like concept in psychology that's like the last minute like trauma dump, where like right before like a conversation will finish, they'll be like, oh yeah, by the way, like my mum died, and I feel like you just did that, like we're wrapping up and you're like, yeah, family trauma. And you just like, it's so interesting.
Actually had a real like conversation with myself when I was realizing that like it was one thing to do that to myself over and over, to like replicate that situation, but to do that to what I want my future family to be, I was like, no, you know, like that doesn't like, and isn't that so funny that we can often stop doing things for other people that literally don't even exist and we won't stop doing them for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, if you want to think about it in the way of like, think about how your inner child deserved to be loved, and choose somebody based on what your childhood version of you deserved.
And I want to quickly talk about, I've heard you speak about the scarcity effect within relationships.
Yeah.
And I'd love to just hear like a little bit of that from you.
Yeah. So I think when this comes back to dating, right, and reaching 30 and feeling like, oh my God, like I haven't met the one yet, like when like I'm running out of time, there is this sense that when something is scarce, it feels more valuable. So when you feel like there aren't many good people out there to date, suddenly you come across somebody that's like kind of 75% there, and you're like, okay, yeah, great. I need to lock that down. I'm going to date that person, even though I know they're not right for me, because there isn't, this isn't what I really want isn't out there. It's like when you're really, really hungry and you're like, okay, so like maybe like 500 meters down the road is like this pizza place and there's really nothing else around. So I'll just eat the pizza, even though I really don't like pizza, even though I'm gluten intolerant. Like I'll have to go there because there's not enough. There's a scarcity of things. So I assign more value to the thing that is there. That's basically a long-winded way of also explaining how when there is somebody who is giving you not much, just kind of breadcrumbing, leading you on, drawing you in, pushing you away, you're like, their time is scarce. They're a valuable person because they never have time for me. They must be somebody who's pretty good. So suddenly your value of them and your attention and your appreciation of them like skyrockets. It goes like way up because they have poised themselves as somebody who is scarce and therefore like somebody who has something to give. So it's something to watch out for. Like if you find yourself drawn to somebody who is kind of like going hot and cold, it is because of that cognitive bias. It's because of the scarcity effect.
That's so interesting. And I'm actually so livid because we really need to end this episode. But
time.
Can we do another one?
Come on my show.
I would love to.
We do a big old chit chat.
Yeah, because we've talked a lot about relationships and we've talked a lot about life plans. I want to talk about friendships. I want to talk about confidence. I want to talk about overachieving. I want to talk about business.
Yeah. We'll have to do it again.
We have much to discuss.
We do.
So before we end, I would love to know what the best piece of advice is that you have ever been given.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Whoa. Oh my God. Do you know what? This feels like a job interview. I'm like,
get it right. If you don't get it right, we're not actually going to do that other episode.
Yeah. Whoa. Oh, yikes. I think the best piece of advice I've ever been given is like, do something because you love it, not because other people think that it's important. And I just think it applies to everything. Mm-hmm. It applies to work, love, life, money. It's important to you. If you love it, it doesn't really matter what other people have to say.
No, I think that is so valuable and so true. And I think if a lot of us held that up to some things that we were doing right now, we'd realise.
I know, right?
Maybe not that
It's
important.
wild. It's wild.
Well, I think that is the perfect place. Well, actually, usually I say I think that's the perfect place to end. I don't think it's the perfect place to end because I want to keep going.
Next time.
We will. We're going to do this again. But thank you so much for coming on. You have been amazing. I feel like we could talk for days, weeks, months, and years. And yeah, I really appreciate the work that you do within the space because you've helped me understand my own brain.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me on the show.